Betrayal Hub. Subscribe. You'll find thoughtful, realistic relationship stories here. Subscribe if that's your thing. She pulled her shoulder away when I reached for her in the kitchen. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to make the message land. Her phone was already in her hand, screen glowing against the cabinets. Thumb moving fast like something urgent lived there. She didn't look up. Later that night, the message came through while I was still at my desk, laptop open, code compiling in the background. She texted that I needed to stop acting needy, that it wasn't attractive. The words sat there, clean and final, like a line of code that deletes more than you expect. I didn't respond. I finished the build. I closed the laptop. I didn't say goodnight. Public things didn't change. We still showed up together. Still sat across from friends at dinner. Still smiled when someone took a photo. She laughed easily then, her hand brushing my arm only when someone was watching. At home, she moved differently. Always angled away. Always just out of reach. In bed, she turned to the edge, phone lighting her face in the dark. The screen reflected in the window like a second life running parallel to mine. I started noticing patterns. Her energy spiked when her phone buzzed. Her mood dipped when it didn't. She dressed differently on days she didn't come straight home. Not dressed up. Curated. Like she expected to be framed. When I passed behind her once, I caught a name on the screen I didn't recognize, followed by a flame emoji and a reply that came back instantly. She tilted the phone away without looking guilty, just practiced. At night, I stopped trying to close the distance. I took showers later. I slept earlier. I put my phone in airplane mode and left it face down on the desk. No goodnight. No check-in. No lingering at the bedroom door. In the morning, I was already gone when she woke up. Coffee brewed, mug left clean in the sink, my presence reduced to absence. She noticed on the third night. Not right away. Not when I didn't touch her. When I didn't ask. When I didn't wait. She stood in the hallway in one of my old shirts, scrolling with one hand, calling my name once, then again, as if volume might summon interest back into the room. I walked past her to grab my jacket. She watched me like I was misbehaving, like I'd missed a cue. That evening, she sent another message. Shorter this time, asking if everything was okay. I didn't answer. I didn't say goodnight. And somewhere between the quiet of the apartment and the hum of my car starting, something shifted. Not loudly. Not enough for her to post about. But enough that she began checking where I was sleeping instead of who she was talking to. The first crack didn't come from her. It came from someone who had no reason to lie to me. Mark from my team mentioned it casually during a break, like it was nothing worth remembering. He said he'd seen my wife's Instagram pop up in his Explore feed, some gym clip looping on repeat, her comment pinned near the top with a laughing emoji and a line that sounded too familiar. He didn't look at me when he said it. He just kept stirring his coffee, letting the silence do the work. That night, I didn't open Instagram. I didn't need to. I watched her instead. She sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her, phone balanced against her knee, smiling at the screen in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. Not warm. Energized. Like she was being mirrored back the version of herself she liked most. Every few seconds, her thumb paused, waiting. Every pause ended with a buzz. Immediate. Reliable. She glanced toward the hallway once, checking if I was watching. I wasn't. I was already gone, jacket on, keys in hand, my presence reduced to background noise. Later, while she showered, her phone lit up again on the counter. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The name flashed across the lock screen, followed by a flexed arm emoji and 3 dots pulsing beneath it, typing before she even finished reading the last message. The speed mattered. The certainty. Whoever he was, he didn't hesitate. He was always there. I dried my hands slowly and walked away before the screen went dark. The next day, I adjusted my routine without announcing it. I left earlier. Came back later. I stopped syncing my schedule to hers. My nights filled with quiet things that didn't need witnesses. Late meals. Long drives. Headphones on, phone off. When I came home, she was already in bed, the glow of her screen fading as I entered, her body angled away like a reflex. She started asking small questions then. Not accusations. Not concern. Inventory checks disguised as curiosity. She asked if I was working more. Asked if something was wrong. Asked if I was tired. I answered with neutral sounds and kept moving. I didn't sit beside her. I didn't lean in. I didn't say goodnight. By the end of the week, the tone changed. She hovered near doorways, waited for me to look up, sent messages that stayed unread longer than she liked. Her online energy stayed loud. Her offline presence grew restless. She had replaced intimacy with attention, and now attention was no longer guaranteed. One evening, she stood behind me while I packed my bag for the gym, watching like she expected an explanation to surface on its own. When it didn't, she asked who I was spending my nights with now. I zipped the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and told her calmly that I was spending them with silence, just like she'd suggested. Then I walked out before she could turn the question into something louder. I didn't go looking for proof. It arrived on its own, layered into the routine she thought I no longer noticed. Receipts came first. Small charges that didn't match groceries or gas. Protein shakes from a place she'd never mentioned. A gym across town she didn't pass on her commute. They showed up on the shared account like background static, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. I paid attention without reacting. I let the numbers sit there, clean and unemotional. At home, her behavior sharpened. She kept her phone face down now, took calls on the balcony even when it was cold. When she came back inside, she carried a different energy with her, lighter, almost distracted, like she'd just stepped out of another room I wasn't allowed into. She posted more. Stories timed for evenings when I was quietest. Gym mirrors, close angles, music I didn't recognize. The comments stacked fast. One name appeared every time, early and often, like a signature. I never clicked it. I didn't need to. I could tell by the rhythm. The way her shoulders loosened when that notification hit. The way she checked again even after replying, just to see if he was still there. At night, she stopped pretending to wait for me. She rolled to her side, screen lighting her cheek, fingers moving quickly, then slowing, then stopping as if someone on the other end had taken over. One evening, she left her laptop open on the dining table when she went to shower. A message preview slid into the corner of the screen, bold and confident, reacting to something she'd sent earlier. It wasn't explicit. It didn't need to be. It was familiar in a way that didn't belong to me anymore. I closed the laptop without reading further and moved it back to where she'd left it, exactly aligned, nothing disturbed. From that night on, I changed my face. Not deliberately. It just happened. My responses flattened. My movements became efficient. When she spoke, I listened without leaning in. When she reached for me absent-mindedly, I stayed still. She noticed the stillness more than any argument. She tested it, brushing past me, pausing in doorways, laughing a little too loud at her phone, waiting for a reaction that never came. She asked once if I was upset. I said I was busy. It wasn't a lie. I was busy stepping out of a role she'd already replaced. By the end of the week, she began watching me the way I'd been watching her, searching for signs she could read. There were none. I had already moved into a quieter position, one where I could see everything without being seen. I didn't announce my disappearance. I let it happen the way night replaces day, without asking permission. My phone stopped lighting up after evenings. Not blocked, not muted, just unreachable. Airplane mode became routine, a clean cut that didn't leave marks. I started sleeping in the guest room some nights, then not sleeping at home at all. When I was there, I moved through the apartment like a visitor who already knew where the exits were. She reacted in stages. First, confusion. She asked if something was wrong with my phone. Then, irritation. She complained about how disconnected I'd become, how hard it was to reach me. Her messages came faster when they went unanswered, stacking on top of each other like she was trying to trigger a response by volume alone. I read them in the morning without replying, scrolling through concern that gradually sharpened into suspicion. One evening, I came home late and found her sitting upright in bed, phone clutched in both hands, screen dark. She hadn't been scrolling. She'd been waiting. Her eyes followed me as I crossed the room to grab clean clothes. She asked where I'd been. I said I was out. She asked with who. I said alone. The word landed heavier than I expected. She didn't like that answer. It gave her nothing to argue with. From then on, she tracked my absences more closely. She listened for my footsteps, checked the driveway when it got quiet. When she posted online, she checked to see if I'd seen it. I hadn't. When she tagged locations, she watched to see if I'd ask questions. I didn't. The attention she'd outsourced wasn't filling the space I'd left behind. It only highlighted it. I noticed her panic in small movements. The way she hovered near the door when I put on my jacket. The way she lingered in rooms I was about to leave. She started going to bed later, staying awake as if sleep itself might cost her something. When I wasn't there, she texted into the dark, questions wrapped in casual language, fishing for reassurance I no longer provided. One night, she called. Not texted. Called. I watched the phone vibrate on the table without touching it. The call stopped. A message followed, asking if I was okay, asking if I was mad, asking if I was with someone else. I didn't answer. I finished what I was doing and went to sleep. The next morning, she looked at me like I'd done something irreversible. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused her. I'd simply stopped showing up where I wasn't wanted. And in the quiet that followed, she began to understand that whatever she'd replaced me with didn't know how to hold a house together when the lights went off. I learned who he was without asking. His presence started leaking into my life through systems that didn't care about secrecy. A friend forwarded a clip without context, a workout reel that had gone mildly viral. The camera loved him. Confident angles. Clean edits. My wife's username appeared in the comments within seconds of posting, pinned near the top like a badge. The timing told me everything. He wasn't chasing. He was available. Always on. Always ready to respond. That was the appeal. I didn't confront him. I didn't follow him. I didn't block anything. I let the algorithm do what it does best and kept my distance. Instead, I paid attention to how fragile his structure was. Public routines. Predictable partnerships. Sponsorship tags that depended on a clean image. He built his life on visibility. All I had to do was look without touching. At work, I shifted focus. I volunteered for projects that pulled me out of the house for days at a time. I rerouted money quietly, separating expenses without changing our lifestyle enough to trigger questions. The shared account still existed. It just stopped being the center of gravity. I closed loops she didn't know were open. She didn't notice at first. She was too busy maintaining the illusion that nothing had changed. Her behavior grew louder. She posted more aggressively, captions sharper, photos closer, like she was daring someone to react. When I didn't, she escalated offline. She started dropping hints about loyalty, about trust, about how distant people drift apart. She said it like a warning, not a confession. I listened without interrupting, my face neutral, my attention elsewhere. Behind the scenes, information moved. Quiet messages sent from accounts that couldn't be traced back to me. A sponsorship manager received screenshots that raised questions about exclusivity. A business partner noticed scheduling conflicts that didn't add up. Nothing explosive, just enough friction to slow his momentum. He wouldn't know where it came from. He didn't need to. Structures like his collapse when attention shifts even slightly. She felt it before she understood it. The buzz from her phone dulled. Replies took longer. Her smiles at the screen faded faster. She refreshed more often, waiting for the energy to come back. It didn't. She started checking my face again, like she was trying to read a language she'd stopped studying months ago. One evening, she asked if I'd seen her latest post. I said no and kept walking. The truth hit her harder than any accusation. I wasn't competing. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even curious. The man she'd chosen for excitement couldn't stabilize her when the noise dipped. And the man she'd called needy had quietly removed himself from the equation, leaving her to feel the imbalance alone. The shift became visible to other people before she admitted it to herself. It happened at a small gathering she insisted we attend, something work-related where appearances still mattered to her. She arrived energized, phone already warm in her hand, scanning the room like it owed her something. I stayed near the edges, speaking when spoken to, listening more than I talked. I didn't stand beside her. I didn't orbit. I existed independently, and that unsettled her more than distance ever had. Her usual rhythm didn't land. She laughed a little too loud, checked her phone a little too often, adjusted her posture like she was waiting for a camera that never came. When someone asked where I'd been lately, I answered evenly and turned the conversation elsewhere. No tension, no story, just absence. She watched that exchange closely, like she'd expected me to fill in a role I'd already vacated. The comments started subtly. A colleague mentioned she hadn't seen her trainer friend around lately. Someone else joked about how quiet her stories had been this week. No accusations, no sympathy, just observations that landed without warning. She smiled through them, nodding, deflecting, but her eyes kept cutting toward me, searching for backup I didn't provide. At one point, She leaned in close enough for only me to hear and asked if I was okay. Not softly, sharply, like a correction. I met her eyes, calm, unreadable, and told her I was fine. Then I stepped away before she could anchor herself to my presence. The space I left behind stayed empty longer than she expected. Later, I noticed her standing alone near the window, phone in hand, not scrolling, waiting. When it finally buzzed, the reaction was delayed, muted. She read whatever came through twice, then locked the screen without replying. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly, like something had missed its cue. By the time we left, people were already forming their own conclusions. Not about betrayal, about imbalance. They could see it in the way she hovered and I didn't, in the way she searched for reassurance and found none. She walked faster to the car than usual, irritation bleeding through her silence. At home, she tried to reclaim ground. She talked about schedules, about reconnecting, about how things felt off. I listened without engaging, putting my keys down, moving through the space like it belonged to me alone. When she finally stopped talking, the quiet stretched long enough to make her uncomfortable. That night, she stayed awake long after I went to bed. I could feel it without seeing it, the restless movement, the weight of someone realizing that control isn't lost in dramatic moments. It slips away when the other person no longer reacts. And by the time the room goes quiet, everyone else has already noticed who's standing alone. Her isolation didn't arrive as silence. It arrived as noise that no longer landed anywhere. Notifications came and went without changing her posture. She refreshed feeds that used to reward her instantly. The phone stayed in her hand longer, like an extension she couldn't put down without losing balance. At home, she followed me from room to room under the pretense of tidying, reorganizing things that didn't need it, hovering close enough to be noticed and far enough to pretend it was accidental. I was there without being available. I cooked for myself and cleaned my own plate. I left before she finished speaking and returned after she'd given up waiting. When she asked about my plans, I answered with logistics, not invitations. When she mentioned reconnecting, I nodded and moved on. The rhythm was deliberate. Separate sleep, separate routes, separate attention. Nothing dramatic, nothing to argue with. She began reaching out to people she hadn't spoken to in months. I could hear the calls from the other room, her voice brighter than it felt, asking casual questions that carried weight underneath. The conversations ended faster than she expected. Everyone was busy. Everyone had plans. The attention she'd relied on was conditional, and the conditions were shifting. At night, she sat on the edge of the bed and waited for something I didn't give. She asked if I was coming to sleep. I said I was tired and turned the light off in the other room. She lay there longer than usual, the mattress quiet, the house too large for two people who no longer met in the middle. I noticed the small cracks she couldn't hide, the way she double-checked the lock even when I was home, the way she paused before opening messages, bracing for disappointment. When she tried to lean into me once, casually, like before, I stayed still, not rejecting, not reciprocating, just absent. The moment passed, awkward and unresolved, leaving her to carry it alone. She tried warmth next. Soft touches, familiar jokes, reminders of shared history delivered like offerings. I acknowledged them without stepping closer. She tried irritation when that failed, then concern, then silence. None of it changed my pace. One evening, she stood in the doorway and watched me pack an overnight bag. She didn't ask where I was going. She asked when I'd be back. I told her I didn't know. The truth unsettled her more than a lie would have. I left without looking back, not to punish her, but because my life no longer required permission. That night, she stayed awake. I could feel it across the distance, the awareness settling in that being replaced is loud, but being left behind is quiet and final. And in that quiet, she began to understand that I wasn't pulling away. I had already stepped out, and the space I left behind had no edges to grab onto. The confrontation didn't explode. It condensed. It happened on an ordinary evening when the apartment felt too quiet to ignore. She waited until I finished what I was doing, until there was nothing left to delay the moment. When she spoke, it wasn't angry. It was careful, like she was stepping onto unstable ground and didn't want to trigger anything sharp. She asked what was happening to us. Not why, not who, what. As if the situation itself had detached from both of us and taken on a life of its own. I looked at her long enough to make it clear I was listening, then went back to packing my laptop into my bag. The movement mattered more than any explanation. She followed it with her eyes, tracking every small action like data she could still process. She moved closer, closing the space I'd been maintaining for weeks. She asked if I was seeing someone else. The question carried fear, not accusation. I told her no. The relief flickered, then faded when she realized that answer didn't fix anything. She asked why I was sleeping elsewhere. I said I needed quiet. She said she was right there. I didn't respond. Presence isn't proximity. She knew that. She'd taught it to me. She mentioned how distant I'd become, how cold. She said it felt like I was punishing her. I finally looked up then, not defensively, not emotionally, just present. I told her I wasn't punishing anyone. I was responding. The word landed harder than she expected. Response implies cause. She didn't ask what that cause was. She already knew. She tried to reframe it as a phase, something external, stress, work, timing. She reached for my arm like muscle memory. I didn't pull away. I didn't lean in. I stayed exactly where I was. The stillness broke her rhythm. She withdrew her hand slowly, as if realizing it no longer belonged there. Her voice softened. She asked if we could talk later, really talk. I said we already were. That ended the momentum. She stood there, waiting for more, for reassurance, for anger, for something she could react to. Nothing came. When she finally stopped speaking, the silence didn't rush to fill the space. It stayed open. I zipped the bag and set it by the door. She asked if I was leaving again. I said yes. She asked when I'd be back. I told her I didn't know. As I reached for the handle, she said my name the way she used to, full and familiar. I paused, just long enough to acknowledge it, then left. Not because I didn't hear her, because hearing her no longer required me to stay. Her collapse wasn't public. Not at first. It happened in fragments, in places where no one was recording. She stopped posting for a while, then returned with safer content, recycled angles, captions that felt rehearsed. The engagement didn't come back the way it used to. Comments thinned. Messages slowed. The man who had once replied instantly now appeared sporadically, his attention divided, his presence unreliable. Whatever intensity he'd offered had been situational. When her life stopped feeding it, he drifted. At home, the atmosphere shifted again. Not tense. Hollow. She moved through the apartment like a guest who stayed too long. She cooked and forgot to eat. Cleaned the same surface twice. Picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She started sleeping earlier, then later, unable to land anywhere comfortably. When I was there, she watched me carefully, like she was studying a stranger who knew her too well. The questions she'd been avoiding surfaced in indirect ways. She asked if I still planned to renew the lease. Asked if I changed my passwords. Asked if I was unhappy. Each question circled the truth without touching it. I answered plainly and kept moving. I didn't explain my tone. I didn't justify my choices. I existed parallel to her, not against her. One afternoon, I came home to find her sitting on the floor of the bedroom, back against the bed, phone beside her instead of in her hand. She wasn't crying. She looked emptied out, like someone who'd run out of options they believed in. She told me she felt invisible. The irony didn't need commentary. I listened without correcting her. That evening, she tried to talk about the past, about when things felt easier, about how she hadn't realized when the distance started. She mentioned small moments she'd dismissed at the time. Me standing in doorways waiting. Me reaching out and stopping halfway. Me going quiet instead of pushing. Each memory surfaced late, sharpened by loss. She spoke them like discoveries, not confessions. I didn't interrupt. I didn't add my own memories. I let hers arrive on their own, one after another, stacking into something heavier than guilt. Understanding without rescue. When she finally looked at me, there was no expectation left in her expression, just recognition. Later that night, I slept in the other room again. The house settled around us, unchanged. No doors slammed. No words raised. Just the weight of a realization that arrives too late to undo anything. She lay awake, replaying moments that no longer existed, while I rested inside a life that had already moved forward. By morning, she understood something that couldn't be argued with. Losing attention hurt. Losing stability terrified her. But losing someone who had quietly held everything together without asking for credit left her alone in a way no replacement could fix. The ending didn't arrive with a decision announced out loud. It settled in quietly, the way routines do when they no longer need negotiation. I kept my schedule. She stopped trying to intercept it. We crossed paths in the apartment like people who shared history but no longer shared momentum. There was no fight left to finish, only space that had already been claimed. One evening, she waited until I was home and still, not distracted, not rushing out. She stood across from me without her phone in her hand for the first time in weeks. The absence of it made her look exposed. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She said she understood now. The words sounded practiced, but the tone didn't. The question came carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something that was already fragile. I told her I was already doing it. That was the truth. I hadn't paused my life waiting for her realization to arrive. She asked if there was still a chance. Not in desperation. In clarity. Like someone finally reading the room correctly. I didn't answer right away. Silence isn't punishment. It's information. I let it sit long enough for her to feel it without interpreting it as cruelty. When I spoke, I told her I hadn't disappeared. I had stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. I said it evenly, without weight behind it. The sentence wasn't a threat or a lesson. It was a boundary that had already been enforced. She nodded slowly. Not because she agreed. Because she understood she no longer controlled the outcome. Whatever came next would move at my pace or not at all. There were no negotiations left that involved convincing me to stay the way I was. That night, I slept well. Not because things were resolved, but because they were clear. In the morning, I left early, as usual. She didn't ask where I was going. She didn't text after I left. The house held its quiet without tension for the first time in months. I didn't walk away in anger. I didn't stay out of fear. I moved forward because my life no longer revolved around being chosen at night by someone who'd already learned how to replace me during the day. And whatever she did next would happen without my reaction shaping it. I didn't disappear. I just stopped returning to places where my presence had been taken for granted.